India has never produced a truly global consumer brand.
Brand building is not that rigid. Cheap and chalao is something that people accepted in our country. We never cared to own cultures like Ayurveda, yoga, chai.
And 95% of the startups, they fail because they build something that nobody absolutely wants. Entrepreneurship is about a lot of hard work.
We've been a high volume delivering, but not a high value deriving nation. Maggi was one of the most interesting case studies. AI is actually a force of multiplier. Brand building narrative has changed. What is your contingency plan? What is your long-term trust building narrative? What is your mid-term and short-term relevance building stance?
Today on Why Not India series, I'm joined by Gursimran Singh, someone who has spent the last 17, 18 years shaping how brands show up across two very complex markets, India and Southeast Asia. He has had leadership roles at Marico, Publicis, QissaHauz, recently as the ex-head of strategy and growth at PhD Singapore. And he has worked with some of the best names in the industry like Singapore, HSBC, Singapore Airlines, Diageo. But in my interaction with Gursimran, what sets him apart is the range of his work, right from Flipkart strategic repositioning to Maggi's comeback story. He has worked with Singapore Airlines' award-winning post-pandemic travel campaign. So Gursimran, welcome to the show, or welcome to Why Not India. What's keeping you busy these days?
Thank you, Sudhanshu. Great to sort of be on this show. I think the name itself is quite compelling. In fact, even without any further questions, it makes your mind run in different directions, which is Why Not India? A couple of things that I would sort of have popped up in my head is, why not India for global domination? Why not India for the next big military superpower? Why not India for the next big culinary culture? I mean, there are lots of things that sort of you can keep adding to why not India. And I think that itself will be a 100-episode show for you. But lovely name for the podcast, and thank you for having me. I've been doing a lot of interesting things in the last couple of months, especially 8 to 10 months. And there was a reason why I pushed myself to do it. I think it starts from the place where I started my career in 2006, 2007. And that was the time, when you're in the formative years of your career, there are a lot of things that play an impressionable role in shaping you the way you do. I think I was raised in the Lintas and Unilever School of Brand Building. And that sort of pretty much set context to a lot of things, if I can say it. To add to that, I have an academic background in being a physicist. So 5 years of just physics, and your life pretty much operates as a set of hypotheses that you keep playing with, because that's what physics teaches you to do, to be. And that opened up a very why not kind of a mindset for me. So obviously, why not and what if become almost like thought experiments to everything that you sort of come across in life. I think they have been formative pillars of whatever I have done in the past. So after spending the first 7-8 years in just one company and learning the sort of foundational aspects of brand building, I was like, what if I was to join marketing straight away, right? Because you sort of work with Unilever and some of their best brands, and you were like, okay, why not throw myself to that deep end? So I picked up a role at Marico. After that, the digital sort of marketing world was moving. So then you sort of try yourself saying that, what if I was to go over there? And why not? So the next couple of years took me straight away into learning the social and digital world, and also being part of the founding member of the team at Tilt. So then another bug kind of catches you, and it says that you've been a musician in your past life. What if you were to get a gig in the music streaming industry? So that's where I joined JioSaavn. So it's been not a very calculated, consequence-led decision-making process. What it has been largely is just a couple of thoughts that come to your mind saying that, what can I gain from if I was to go over there? And amidst that, the brand building world changed quite a bit, which means every new place that you went, you were not just learning the new ways in which brands were being built, but you were also learning nuances of the place where you were going to go. So it was first India, India, India. Then it was APAC, APAC, APAC. So there are a lot of things, and I think sometimes complicating your life is the only way to sort of learn a couple of things, which is something that I'm sure even you sort of agree, because we people love to throw ourselves to that deep end. I was supported a lot by my partner also in this journey, and I think together it gave me the conviction to venture into a very different world of brand building and consulting, which is I think one offering that I always put myself out, either whether through the company or even as an individual. As you see, it's not something where brand building traditionally has been. So if I was to say, I think the core of brand building still remains problem identification and hypothesis building. And that's something that I still maintain is the sort of holy grail of brand building, which is understanding consumers. What is the problem you're going after? What is the opportunity that you could create as a result of going after a hypothesis? So that's one part. The other is we're talking all about the AI discoverability world, but I think AI has a lot of sort of functions within itself, right? One is we're talking about AI discoverability, which is soon sort of becoming stronger and stronger, and one day it'll come where it'll sort of take over the world of SEO, or let's say make SEO a subset of it. That's one part. The other is where AI-driven ecosystems can be creative accelerators, whether you sort of do that surely by sort of connecting different parts of your organization, or you make an agent-first approach. That's the second one. And I think the third one largely resides in the area of pure AI-led content creation. So there are different parts to it, and I think we've sort of successfully been able to decode and dabble into those. The third is how you build the entire growth ecosystem for a certain brand, where it could be through collaborations and partnerships with other brands. It could be through partnerships and partner marketing efforts by getting into ecosystems of other players, which is almost like you do your B2B2C marketing. How do you sort of, delve all those into those sort of things? And some of these things are pretty interesting. It's because all three are sort of foundational ways in which businesses either need from 0 to 1 journey or the 1 to 10 journey which we're talking about. So I think that's one core offering on the consultancy that we've been able to give good shape to and found early traction. The second is in the pure content space, which is where we sort of going after two pegs under content marketing. One is how do you do creator-led IPs, and solely sort of focusing on that, because then sort of that feeds into not just the content engine, but that also feeds into evolution of a creator into something else. Like we've seen that happen a couple of times, right? Like we've seen Kusha Kapila launching her own brand. We've seen in the Middle East, Chris Fade going into another sort of realm. He started off, he's still one of the most recognizable voices of Virgin Radio over here, but he started his own business as well. So creators have a sort of shelf life, and they need to sort of evolve beyond that. So that's one part. How can through content and IPs build that for them? The other part of content is I'll soon be sort of getting out with that news out in the open, but we have developed an expertise in doing vertical content and micro-dramas. And that is like the next big boom in the content field that we're looking at this point of time. What are the approaches to it? Where is consolidation likely to be witnessed? As someone who's stepping into this field, what are some of the right early moves? I think some of those, along with some traditional approaches in terms of how do you build tropes, how do you build genres, how do you build content slates based on that sort of comes naturally, which is research backed. But sort of all of this getting into a bit of a flywheel where you create a flywheel that goes from scratch to stream. I think that is the end objective of this model that we're talking about over here, which includes all the way up to partnerships and monetization, so on and so forth. Because all these are going to be needed in the initial stages where you test and learn a lot of things about yourself. So I think that's the second part. The third is where we sort of get into personal branding and career, which is how it feeds into organizations and organization leadership to build their personal brands to ultimately reflect the ultimate brand that they're talking about. So it's almost like a symbiotic relationship between these things, and that's the core of what I'm doing. And also at the other end, I'm helping a close friend launch a culture first commentary platform, which is going to be almost like an ecosystem and a cultural operating system, the way we like to define it, through a certain lens of certain kind of demographic who will sort of be making commentary about the culture. So it's a sort of differentiated offering, but still has mainstream relevance, because the lens that you use to tell cultural stories is very different, but still, because you're talking about culture, it becomes a mainstream part of whatever it is. So I think a lot of things like these I've been doing in the last 8 to 10 months. And I think the proof is in the pudding, and the pudding has sort of started to bake, and I'll soon be ready to serve it to everybody. But yeah, that's where my entire journey has been in the last couple of months, starting all the way from getting inspiration from where I started and where I am today. Thanks to the people I've worked with, thanks to the organizations that have inspired me to build myself better out there.
That's a 360 of entire marketing as a physicist and musician, starting from an agency, working with building brands, now digital marketing, AI and content. And I think what strikes me the most is how you have chosen to address the most complex problems all those years, right? So say, for example, right now, AI-led brand building is something that is most of the companies thinking about. How do I go up there? Content creation is something that is very, very, since it is buildings, I understand there is a lot of, not very solid answers that are there. So I see that you have, as you said, you have gone with the flow. You have always asked yourself, why not? You have always taken up problems that are not just contemporary, but they're also complex. You spoke about problem solving. Okay. So let me ask you this question. So you have done this 17 years, Southeast Asia, Marico, 2 PhD Singapore. If I ask you, what is that one belief about brands and brand building that has stayed constant through all of that? What would that be?
The constant attempt to stay meaningful in consumers' lives. That's what it has come down to. Or let's say that's something that has been constant, not come down to, if I may correct myself on that. That is something which has been a constant. 20 years ago also, we used to, like a lot of brands used to commission usage and attitude studies. And what they helped unearth was what are the category entry points, what are some of the upcoming trends that are going to impact consumption, and how do people sort of navigate towards using either your brand or using a substitute of your brand. Now, whether that could be a substitute, could be another brand, it could be another category altogether, because India as a country and consumers in India, we have pretty much gone almost like there's been a trajectory in terms of adoption. Right. So we are all like as a country, when it comes to, let's say, FMCG goods, we have done the entire round where we've been using household remedies and rudimentary solutions. And then we sort of adopted soap for washing hair. Then we graduated to using shampoo and conditioner somewhere made away. And then we've come all the way to mousses and serums and all those sort of things, right? And sprays and all those sort of things, which are far more evolved. So I think we've seen that trajectory. In terms of electronic usage, the country that has witnessed in both the parts, there's been a certain demographic who has gone from desktops to sort of laptops, to tablets, to phones. But there's also been a large demographic that has gone directly to the mobile age, right? So there are a lot of evidence points that are there. But I think all along the way, because most of the categories have had a huge challenge of playing the penetration game, relevance building has been one of the primary objectives for anybody at this point in time, historically and even now. Why am I saying now? Is because if we were to see the rise of what we call Instagram brands today, they are creating relevance in a very, very different way, right? Some of them are taking the game away from how it has been built in the last 30, 40 years. We are talking about, in the last 20, 30 years, category of milk food supplements being built iteratively and incrementally. And suddenly you also have today a day and age where people are looking at lifestyles and are choosing protein bars. So So there's a relevance building today happening for a certain percentage to adopt milk food supplements also, the Horlicks and the Maltos and the Compliments of the world. But there is also brands like Whole Truth, like Bite, who are sort of building that narrative to take people to the next wave of consumption when it comes to product selection. So what's happening as a result is we are having to play the relevance game, and hence brands have to be more meaningful. And being meaningful can come from different contexts. It could come from culture, it could come from habits, it could come from exposure, it could come from something as much as how Indians travel as tourists abroad and bring some new flavors and tastes from there and then demand India and Indian entrepreneurs to deliver it to them. So I think staying meaningful is the biggest challenge anybody can have today. And I think that's where the whole science of brand building, has never got boring. It'll never run out of ideas. And that game is something that has to be constantly reinvented for newer sets of users.
Very, very interesting perspective, because even if you have, say, somebody has stayed in a single brand for the last 30 years, way the user consumption behavior has changed, the way our buying power has changed, our expectation from products have changed, how people travel outside, they come back and demand more things. So even while you have done challenges even more when you work with multiple brands, even inside a brand, it's it was 30 years back, it is not. So I said that's a very, very interesting perspective. Of one thing that I was reading recently was in startup world, Graham recently said that 95% of the startups, they fail because they build something that nobody absolutely wants. Something poorer or something. And that relevance bit of how are you being part of your customer's life, that is very, very interesting. And you have worked on some of the brands that have been part of our lives, right? Many other people can just write case studies about it. You have worked on products like Maggi, companies like Flipkart and Singapore Airlines. When you're inside this, so brand is something that people, a lot of folks say, okay, brand is something, it's not it's not tangible. But there is a point when it becomes alive. Is there a moment when you feel that the brand is alive, or when does it stop being from something just on a paper or on a billboard, and it starts feeling something which is very, very real?
I think a brand is as alive as the everyday challenge that it faces. So you see the brand in action when there's a problem, when there's a challenge. And I think those challenges keep constantly reinventing themselves. Sometimes as the category penetration games, example, not very long ago, I'm talking about 5-6 years, and I'm taking 5-6 years as a short horizon is because 5-6 years are short horizons when it comes to the category creation game. When I was working on Flipkart, very interesting statistic stares you in your face is that we're talking about 2019 statistics of the e-commerce category say that the penetration of e-commerce in India was less than 5%. But all-time trials were almost half of the online transactors, which means half the online transactors who were online had tried e-commerce, but the penetration was still 5%. And if you sort of join the dots on that one, what it basically tells you is there is a very huge hangover of the offline shopping world and unorganized retail in India, which is there, which is very, very tough to break. Now, if you were to look at traditionally how categories have been built in the West or even in India, you would expect the penetration to gradually go from 5 to 6 to 10 to 20 to 30, whatever, and reach certain levels like how other categories have. And then you would expect some disruption to happen, and then something else comes. But we are witnessing today the emergence of quick commerce as a category. Quick commerce is challenging e-commerce. Without e-commerce even going over 10% penetration. In fact, yesterday only I was reading like how the double down of Amazon and others in the quick commerce category has eroded a lot of value of traditionally resident brands who were there in e-commerce. So, like I said, the brand has to be alive at all points of time. Sometimes it's challenged. Sometimes it is, in the case of, let's say, Maggi, the brands that I've worked on in the past, call it a crisis of trust and over-dependence. the Maggi is a case study, and which we'll talk about at some point. But the brand has had to sort of kick in at that point of time and reinvent itself. So to answer your question, when is the brand most alive? I think the brand is alive all the time, subject to what problems you put on the brand.
So one of the things that I remember is just when I joined ICICI Bank and we had a run on the bank because of some fake news that had gone around. And as you said, that is where and suddenly brand building, keeping the trust of your customers became very, very important. Suddenly a company that, that crisis awakened the entire brand of ICICI. And of course, later, there were a lot of very good, memorable campaigns that ICICI did. But before that, it was like, as a bank, you need to work on the trust more. That's really, really important. The brand is, of course, definitely 100% there, but it becomes palpable. You can see it when you're navigating a challenge, you're navigating a crisis, then it becomes something very, very real. Talking about that, come back in 2015, it is one of the most studied re-entries in the Indian brand history. Yeah. There was a time when it was being written off. There is also, Maggi has a nostalgia, but you also worked on Kuch Achha Pak Raha Hai, which is a different register to it. It hits differently. Talk me through that. What exactly was the intent with that campaign? And what did you understand about Maggi, the nostalgia narrative that was missing and that was brought in at that point?
Maggi was one of the most interesting case studies. I think I mentioned before. I call it a crisis of trust and overdependence. We all know the background to it. In FDA told get Maggi off the shelves because it contains excessive lead content. Maggi had to do that. It had to get the product off the shelves. And gradually, I think over time, sort of resolved the case, cleared its name, and it was back on the shelves. But, what happened in those few number of days is there is a bit of emotional trust loss that happened, which is families and especially homemakers questioning that, what am I giving to my kid? Yeah. That sort of hits very differently. And when that happens, is the first time when the product or the nutrition repertoire in a house gets disturbed. So we're talking about, brands spending millions to have a foot in the door. Here, because of this, a lot of other brands automatically got that foot in the door, right? So revaluation on the consumer mindset front. But I think while that was being fixed with a campaign, which is Meri Maggi, I miss you, or we miss you. But there was a deeper realization in the Nestle offices at that point of time. They basically said that there is clearly an overdependence on the noodles portfolio. A noodles portfolio pretty much accounts for more than 4/5 of Maggi's turnover in India. So if you are counting on one product, one portfolio to do that, it becomes a strategic vulnerability in times like these. The task then became not just about actually how to restore trust, but it also became how do you sort of solve for the strategic vulnerability. So the business task then became that, one is sort of fixed for this loss of emotional trust, which was there. But the other also became how do you sort of pivot from a snacking brand to a cooking brand? Because Maggi globally is known as a cooking brand, not a snacking brand. So how do you sort of make that shift? I think that became a thing. Now, one thing we know about trust is that, and trust is that kind of a concept which I usually like to explain based on human relationships, right? First of all, it takes years to build that trust. But let's say when it breaks in an instant. And then it takes even longer to rebuild that trust again. So expecting that this trust would be built with one campaign or let's say in a month or two was definitely not on. You cannot sort of expect trust to be repaired in a month or two, which means there's a longer game that you needed at that point of time. And I think combined with that, what we had to do is we also had to make that shift from a snacking brand to a cooking brand. What we did is we chose cooking as the platform which we would use to announce the shift in portfolio. But we also call of saying cooking is the way we'll start rebuilding trust again. Now, how do you do that? And I think that's where some cultural understanding about people comes handy, right? So let's say, for example, if we were to say, go out, let's cook with Maggi, right? That would have fallen on deaf ears, and that's the cultural reason behind it is one, Indian households that you go to, and we're talking about especially households almost 10 years ago, and we're talking about mass India where Maggi is sort of consumed, where it concerns the household when the price point of Maggi goes from 10 rupees to 11 rupees. That's price sensitivity we're talking about, those households. In those households, we are talking about cooking being done 2 or 3 times a day. So to go to those houses and say, let's cook, they'd be like, what are you talking about? I'm already cooking 2 to 3 times a day. So that wouldn't have cut ice. To sort of build it a little further, in Indian households, it's actually the woman of the house who has been traditionally been cooking. And cooking has always been an unsung aspect of this entire drill. So going further and saying, let's cook to an audience, one who cooks 2 to 3 times a day, and on top of that, does this thankless job, it wouldn't have sort of cut ice with them. So what we did is we basically started going down a rabbit hole of understanding consumers culturally. And what it basically told us is that when you immerse yourself in a concept of cooking, you realize is that when you cook, there are a lot of life lessons and values that you learn. So let's say, for example, when I'm cooking, if someone's coming to my house and if there's 6 people, I will cook for 6 people as opposed to cooking for 3 people on an ordinary basis. If I know the kids are coming, I'll make it slightly lesser spicy. I'll dice the vegetables or the meat to a size where kids can sort of eat it. Or I'll make a separate menu altogether for kids, right? So there are life lessons in that, like being considerate, being aware of what the other person is, sharing, all those sorts of things, right? So it's almost like cooking is not just merely an act. It is a cultural code that we Indians abide by. And to then sort of elevate the brief from saying that we don't want to build Maggi just as a cooking agent, but we want to build it as a strategic ally in people's lives. So it's almost like saying that what you cook in the kitchen has a knockoff effects in the outer world, outside the kitchen also. So you suddenly take the brand from the kitchen to outside the kitchen in lives of people. That was the sort of positioning that changed the entire brief for us. And from there came the platform of Kuch Acha Pakra, which means overcooking. There's a lot that's happening in life. And then, just to sort of go down that route, one is, of course, because you are a brand as big as Maggi, there are only a few other brands who you can name as big as Maggi. You can probably say Amul is as big as Maggi or bigger or in the same world universe, or Parle. Those are the sort of brands that you sort of compare yourself to. And when you're talking about hitting those sort of audiences, you can't escape from being a mass media brand, which is where I think mass media was done to propagate the message of Kuch Acha Pakra Hai. But to go deeper into playing the trust game, now here's where you move from being a cooking brand to be a brand that people trusted. You needed certain pillars on which you needed to fire and take that Kuch Acha Pakra Hai message to those pillars. And those 4 pillars were basically authenticity, provenance, and social impact. And what that helps do is it helps you build content ecosystems that basically say that if you've got nothing to hide, come to the factories of Maggi and see how it's made yourself, where we source our things from, how we make it. So we actually took some of the biggest influencers like Mayur and Rocky, who were big at that point of time, to go actually behind the scenes and actually put it in front of people. There were live Twitter and YouTube conversations that happened at that point of time, which basically got people to actually come on and sort of have those questions straight away directed. Nutrition was a very, very big pillar in all of this, because it's about addressing the mindset that had got that got destructed due to whatever happened in 2015. And lastly, social impact was where I think co-branding with and doing branded IPs with Z sort of came into the picture, where you sort of valorized everyday heroes who are homemakers, but who are trying to basically do something bigger than cooking by cooking. So I think these are some of the pillars that came together and came together to achieve a twofold task, which is trust and fix for a portfolio problem. I think that's what makes Maggi a lot more special as a campaign.
So there is a lot of learning for all the brand builders that are out there, because a product cannot be perceived in a silo. A product needs to be considered as a part of the person, the day-to-day life, the impact. So it is the deeper understanding of the consumer, not just the consumer, but the effect of product has on that customer's life, right? Not just on your, say, for example, not just the mothers who cook it, but the kids who consume and stuff like that. So this was very fascinating in the way it brought, and you brought this all together. And I think it has been a case study, and the way it evolved essentially was very, very nice. So now let me ask you, from India, you also went to Singapore, right? And you were working for Singapore Airlines. So that's a different world. You worked with HSBC, Kia, Agio. These are global brands. For this, you were in India and you were working with some of the most beautiful brands. As you said, Maggi was as big as it can get. Now, what is the single biggest thing that, changes when you think about the strategy, when you cross border from India to Singapore, East Asia? And what surprisingly also stays the same? When you work at this scale, what is your narrative with the overall storytelling, the narrative that you build, right? So that is what I want to understand from culturally when you cross the borders. What are some of the things that change and some of the things that stay same in terms of brand building?
Yeah, I think what pretty much changes depends upon what is the role that you're playing.
Yeah.
A function of that. So I was in a media first agency, just PhD, and then we were sort of handling the mandate across all these regional brands that we spoke about. And obviously, there are creative partners or creative agencies that you work with who work on the brand with you. So what's interesting is that today brand building, when it comes to a setup where you've got creative agencies, you've got media agencies all coming together, and increasingly clients are forcing everything to be one agency. So it's almost like saying that whether I choose the creative and a media agency from the same holding company, or I choose it from different holding companies, how do you sort of come together to work as a team? That's at the back end. That's for you to handle. What I want is the output for me. So I think clients are increasingly getting towards that, because I think managing too many agencies becomes a bit of a headache. So I think that's one strategic shift I have seen happening in the last couple of years. And especially on those brands that I worked on out of in Singapore and in APAC. Now, in a setup like that, what happens is that that is a creative agency you have to work with, and this is who you are. So there's not much you can change in that, how much ever you want. So building a brand becomes a collective responsibility of all the people, whether you're a media agency, whether you're a creative agency, whether you're a digital agency, whether you're a social agency, whatever it is at the end of the day. Yeah. And you find ways to sort of bridge connections and bridge thoughts that you want to come together with. So let's say if I am defining the brand health projections for any brand for the next 1 or 2 years, a creative agency may come in from the standpoint saying these are sort of parameters in brand health on which we want a movement or a positive impact. Or let's say these are some of the parameters that we should introduce into the tracking. From a media agency standpoint, what you would do is you would historically see what's the movement that's happened. What are the sort of campaigns that have created that movement, and basis that, say in the next 1 or 2 years, if I was to move by this much percentage points, and my investment support that. That's first question as a media agency you've got to answer, which is where now. Given when it comes to spends and investments, in a lot of cases you may have the investments, but in a lot of cases you may not have those investments. So I think one is about saying that when you work, let's say when I worked on a regional or a global sort of brand, which was there, I think some of these pushbacks become your responsibility because you are the center where all of these calls are being taken. A country on which the impact of this marketing plan is going to be doesn't take this call. So let's say, for example, if I am sort of working out of Singapore, India will have its own budget, but such a deep analysis and answering the global brand team in Singapore is not India team's responsibility. It's my responsibility. So I think one is that part over there. The other thing that sort of changes is the media landscapes with which you work. And it's important to understand that it's because most of the marketing today has moved to platform-based marketing. And in that, what happens is understanding platforms, understanding what works over there on those platforms happens to be at multiple levels, right? It can happen at a tactical level where you are saying that, okay, I want to try these new ad experiences, so on and so forth. It can happen at an operational level. You're trying to say that, I'm going to evaluate which duration formats work for me. Does a 10-seconder work? Does 20-seconder work? 1 minute works? 1 minute's not working? We will not do 1 minute henceforth. For example, I'm saying that. That's an operational call. And then there's a strategic call that happens. Just saying that, okay, my marketing mix modeling is telling me this. These are sort of channels that are not working. So next year, do I want to bake these channels in my annual planning or not? Or let's say, for example, with the pure essence of marketing mix modeling, I will have some human intervention also, which is marketing mix modeling is saying this, but my on-ground experience is telling me this. So I will use some of the learnings of marketing mix modeling, but I will also use some human intervention to create a plan for next year. Like those are some of the calls that you take, and you, let's say you understand platforms better, you understand ad experiences better. You understand because you are ultimately the aggregator of everything that comes from global teams also. Cultural understanding. Why the same idea is lesser creatively provocative in our country versus it's that same idea going ballistic and nuts in another country is a matter of understanding cultural approaches, how people see things. I think those are the things that change drastically. What doesn't change in the process of brand building is, again, which I started off the chat with saying that relevance building, that hasn't changed at all. Some of the ways you question certain things. So let's say if you were to sort of map a hypothesis between future growth and current penetration levels, like some of those basics don't change at all. They pretty much remain the same. Or let's say category codes with which you question certain category entry points, they don't change. So how you want to play with those things is something that's totally resident, and it'll stay in those plans, the thinking which is there.
Now, let me ask you the question. Given your experience, that's something that I believe in a lot, right? So here is what I think, and you can agree, disagree, put your thoughts here, right? We talk about this entire podcast is why not India? And the core thesis here is that India has never produced a truly global consumer brand. It's not that the companies or the products are not good enough. I just believe that the narrative infrastructure that is needed to cross geographical boundaries, cultural boundaries, have not been set. Do you believe this is true? Let's say, for example, not taking names, but say Amul girl is so Indian. Do you see how can that narrative break cultural boundaries? If we just talk about brands in general, why haven't the world's so the question here is essentially this narrative infrastructure, and India build narrative infrastructures that can going forward break boundaries. What do you believe around that?
There's a way I feel, and I think it's a very interesting question because we don't look at these things the way we're talking about it right now.
Yeah.
There are a couple of factors to it. And I think it always comes down to culture for me, personally. I'm talking about different sort of things that are happening, right? One is we came from an era where we were ruled by a foreign power, and there was a lot that we got from them. We still talk about like we go to certain cities and we talk about, look at these buildings are 100 years old. They were built by the British. They're still strong. Those, and you talk about certain sort of influences that they've had on our culture. The clothes that we wear today. Why is the shirt and the pant a de facto or a default choice or a workplace attire? Right now, of course, we also see the HP bag as a part of it, which is there. But I'm saying that's the second thing. The way we sort of decode certain things in culture, which is about saying that breakfast like a king and dinner like a pauper. Like those certain concepts that come from that world to us. If I was to translate that in terms of brands, there are a lot of brands which are historically significant or have been influential enough or significant enough in the world of marketing, have had that sort of a hangover up until now as well. Let's talk about companies. They're all tea companies. Tea is one of the biggest consumed goods that we have in India. But tea culture actually came from the West. The way we were there, all the biggest brands like Godfrey Phillips of the world, so on and so forth, Lipton's and all that. Everything comes from there. We did have smaller sort of Indian producing players, but they've been far and few, right? In terms of volumes, if you were to say, those brands sell a lot in the unorganized sector. But we also know that when it's the unorganized sector, the ability to build a brand out of it goes drastically down as opposed to organized sector. So the codes of organized sector encouraged you to build brands that were not built on the basis of Indian values. There are few brands that have been able to have been doing that a little. One very good example that comes to my mind is Royal Enfield. The way it has sort of built a brand, it's a brand that we never built, but we sort of made something very provenance-based, locally produced brand. Hats off to the brand builders of Royal Enfield, the way they built out of Chennai. It's a beautiful case study of how they're doing. The second thing I think that sort of plays a role is how much of our culture have we exported to the world? And I am currently not talking about culture export by sending Indians to the world. Yes, there is a very interesting conversation about Indian diaspora, which we keep talking about and again. But what happens to Indian diaspora, the mentality that we use in marketing to an Indian diaspora doesn't require you to sell your cultural codes to another race or another population. It gets you to sell the same values to the same people who have an Indian connection. So ultimately, the consumers of your Indian brands and goods happen to be Indian people again. As opposed to, let's look at how certain things globally have sort of changed and how other countries have exported their culture, right? I'm talking about some of the more traditional sectors first. Let's talk about automotives. Let's talk about electronics. In automotives, Germany exported German engineering to the world, thanks to Volkswagen. Thanks to a lot of other brands have been sort of doing that. The Japanese sold made in Japan and changed perception, because in the olden, about 5 decades ago, Japanese goods had the perception that they're worst in quality. Some of the players like Sony, Panasonic took it upon themselves to reinvent that and change the perception, and they exported the Japanese culture about perfection and efficiency to the world. More recently, the same game was played by China. And China is a beautiful case study. It's because with such a huge population, China is first what it does, it pilots any product and any brand to its local audiences. Because you're talking about a clearly 1.2 billion people amongst which it's been test marketed. And then they export that to the world. And what's brilliant is that the way they export to the world, they ride on other growing trends and worlds that are sort of growing. So let's say, for example, when China exported, I'm taking the most commonly available and understood concept, which is that of TikTok, right? When TikTok was exported to the world, first it was tested as Douyin in China itself. And then it was exported as TikTok to the world. And mobile penetration was on the rise. People had already gotten used to a feed through Facebook. They didn't have to change the game much. They only had to change the format in which content was being presented. So that's how they sort of leveraged that. Similarly, Korean culture, right? Which the Korean way we got Hallyu, right? Which is there, the export to the world. Now, if we were to see Korea, the economy of Korea has been designed in such a way that they produce for the world. The Daewoo's, the Hyundai's, right? The Samsungs of the world. And now the K-pop culture, right? Because I'm dealing with micro-dramas, I look at Korea also as one of the biggest influencers in the microdrama industry. So is China, right? When you adopt such a mindset, you're not selling to your country's diaspora abroad. You are exporting your values to the outside world. Yeah. And what's interesting when it comes to India as its geography as of today, right? I think we, up until very recently, we've been very satisfied with the fact that there are 1.4 billion people to serve over here. And what we've done is our brands have pretty much very well understood all the microlith and the monolith cultures very well, and they have done a good job of selling to audiences. Yeah, so much so that we never cared to own cultures like Ayurveda, yoga, chai. That is so very Indian, and it's gone abroad, and people are free using our sort of IPs to benefit from them for their audiences. Now, here's where I think the game is changing quite a bit. I do see a lot of potential in the way some of the brands are working today. And I think when we talk about proudly Indian, I think that's the sort of thing we're talking about. I think Royal Enfield first comes to my mind is because I know when I've spoken to anybody abroad in the West or let's say in the East, everybody wanted to come to India, the Royal Enfield for this day and ride it while they're in this country. Or let's say somehow we even sort of found out a way saying that if it costs me so much, how much is it going to cost me to ship it across to my country? And they actually have kept Royal Enfields over there as well. And that sort of gave Royal Enfield an idea saying that the international business could be a very profitable. So it's that sort of a thing. So they've retained that Indian culture, which they've done. I see a lot of that in a lot of lifestyle brands now, which are exporting Indian ethos to the world. Some of the most common names we know is how Gully Labs, Comet, those sort of brands are building those things for the world. They definitely, the first step in their pyramid was to sort of sell to an Indian diaspora audience, but they are not sort of staying just at that. They are participating at international shows, conventions to put that product out there. They are taking subcontracting jobs of producing for some of the biggest brands also, and sort of trying to launch Indian lines with those brands. So much so they have also sort of built certain enablers. So let's say, for example, when you are wanting to export, the first thing that you do is you make your shipping available internationally, so that people can order that. What some of these players are also doing is they are giving free international shipping. So that becomes an enabler to sort of carry your product outside there as well. So I think there is sort of movement happening over there. Let's just talk about a brand like Chamar. Like Chamar was one of the leather brands built locally over here, and now it's sort of doing the rounds of Paris fashion circuit. So there is a clear export happening of India's culture to the world. I think there's a start somewhere over there. I also think to a certain extent, the more we sort of invest in product development, which sort of is guided by principles of made in India, but for the world, we'll be able to support this whole movement of Indian brands for the world a lot more. We've started to sort of put ourselves out there. Some things have created a negative backlash, which is, let's say, with respect to Indian talent being exported globally. It's had its ride over there. We sort of founded a lot of companies. We are today at the helm of many companies over there, but we're also being spoken of taking over jobs of local people over there. So there are certain winds that are sort of going against us culturally, and that's no fault of ours. I think what we can do is we can continue building relevance for India and Indians globally through our brands. And I think that has just started now as opposed to earlier.
Oh, this is very, very interesting. And, I was discussing, I recently put a LinkedIn post around this. And one of the thesis that I have, and which I think you also spoke about, is that we always had that luxury at the same time limitation of having one, say, a good domestic Indian market, which the quantity of the demand was always there. But since India is in the lower part of per capita income, though the demand in terms of quantity was higher, the paying capacity was always lower. So you always, if you had to navigate that, you ended up building things which focus more on, hey, can I push more, can I build more, rather than, and that luxury, say, as you pointed out, South Korea never had. They always had to, from day one, think, I am a small country. If I have to survive this, I have to cater to a much global, much larger audience, right? And when you think about how can a product talk to 5 different people of 5 different cultures, then you build it very differently. And as you said, in India, first is, can I go India first, Indian diaspora first? And as you're rightly saying, that part, as you said, this change, I think many of these Indian brands now are becoming ambitious, right? So that we are at interesting times, and I see, at QissaHauz, we have this mission that, in the next 10 years, we need to have 15 global consumer Indian brands. And if we can play a role in that, I think we would have done our work as well, right? So, and there's interesting project you meant. Yes,
absolutely. Absolutely. Like, God willing, it will. The momentum that's sort of going at this point, like, I usually sort of look at these things in a slightly different way also, which I think I'd like to share with people who are listening to this is, we've been a high volume delivering, but not a high value deriving nation. So we will export spices to the world, which is high volume game, but America will still get all the returns and money from the brains and the brain trust around AI, so on and so forth that they do. So it's almost like saying that low volume, but high money sort of coming in, which is, I think, the game that somewhere India needs to take a look at, that how can it participate in that high value versus high volume. That's where it does. Because I'm saying that there are enough examples around us, right? Bollywood. We're the biggest producer of movies globally. But we still sort of every year have a debate saying that why did we not win at Cannes? It's partly also got to do with the way cinema is assessed globally, how it sort of has its yardsticks, which are very Western in nature. But can we sort of slowly influence that?
Yeah.
I think we can, because in every business line, we've sort of seen someone who's a high volume game has the ability to sort of move the needle, or at least has some say in the game. How to do that is the game.
And see, this influence of, because as you rightly said, if I have been looking at things in a certain way, and it doesn't make mine wrong, but if it is my inability to look at your way of looking things and say, hey, that also could be right, and that requires a lot of what the world is. The word there is soft power, where you make people aware of your POV, your point of view, your belief systems, and it will, over time that change will happen, right? And in the last 10 minutes, you used culture a lot, culture as a context, culture as a competitive advantage, and culture as a thing that brands can tap into. I feel that it's a flywheel. Say, for example, nobody in Germany would have woken up one day and said that, hey, we will be the best in engineering, right? But however, brands took that onus, whether it was Philips or whether it was the automotive brands, they said, okay, and it created an image for the country, and in turn it helped other brands as well. So the same happened with Japan post World War II. It happened in Korea. So this is but so this culture, and this is something that interests me the most in the current work that I do, right? What is culture according to you, right? And once you have that definition, say for example, you walk into a room full of people, and a marketing person, a CMO of a brand that you're working for, and people look at numbers, charts, dashboards, and how do you say that what culture is, and how do you make a case for saying that this cultural what do you say, sensitiveness, or this cultural first approach needs to be taken? How that is something that can it be measurable?
Actually, since we're delving into that, and I think connecting to the earlier question, I think one, building a brand and tapping into culture is a very intentional act. It has to be a deliberate act. Now, let's say what are the sort of words that come to our mind and the minds of everybody, even outside India, globally, when they think of India. There is diverse, there's complex, there's contested. There are three words that largely come. When you have these three words, do you realize how much lesser room are we giving ourselves to be sharply positioned? So one is about saying that what are we doing in culture? Or what is it about us that our culture is telling the world? Which makes them have a perception about us. I think that's the first sort of thing that comes to my mind. The second thing is, I've been a proponent of this in every conversation. Culture is not something brands can build. Culture is something that people build. And brands either attach themselves to that culture, or they nullify it, or they go against it. So you can sort of say that taking Indianness to the world in a way that it profits the brand is a brand riding a certain cultural strand about India. But a brand can also not own, or for lack of any word, it can also sort of detest a certain culture to not associate itself to that. So let's say, for example, cheap chalao, right? Cheap and chalao is something that people accepted in our country. So it's almost like saying that अगर इतने सस्ते में मिल रहा है, अगर इसमें थोड़ी बहुत खराबी चलता है, मैं ले लूंगा क्योंकि सस्ता है. It's cheap, so I'll buy it, no matter if it has a small defect in it. The other thing is, and I've seen this a lot, like even while growing up, right? Like a lot of conversations around when we were as kids, right? And we were growing, we used to outgrow our uniforms, we used to outgrow our shoes every 8-10 months, which means every academic year, we had to buy new shoes, right? I know somewhere along the way, parents are most interested in getting the most long-lasting thing because quality, right? Which is there. But I think all parents take that call saying that एक साल के लिए चल जाएगा ये. So there is about saying that it's about saying that if I can pay slightly lesser and if this can last a year, that is the other mentality. It's about chal jayega. And hence, even the producers and the sellers go with a mindset saying that ho jayega. And I think, and this is a sort of thing that sort of needs to change, and it will change. In fact, I see a change in this ho jayega culture the day we signed the European trade agreement, because every step along the way of everything that is made in India will be audited to see how ethical we are. What are we using? Are we using child labor? Are we using this? Are we using that? It's going to be sort of audited, which means the quality of what we deliver needs to and will go up. So I'm saying that culture is, this is something that a brand didn't create. This entire chal jayega, ho jayega mindset. It's people. Now, whether you want to sort of, as a brand, stand for quality, saying that as opposed to how you witnessed Indians buying and Indians preferring products, I am not a brand who will give you chalu or ho jayega kind of a product. I will stand for quality. So that's basically saying that the existing culture that operates, I will not stand for that, but I will stand for something that redefines India, which is how Japan did. This is how China did, right? And then there is another way of saying that, like this an entrepreneur and a friend of mine who's sort of built this brand called Kali, and it's a luxury lifestyle brand, and I think her whole positioning of that is the future of luxury is ancient, and India has a lot of equity in ancient. Now, is that the sort of culture you want to leverage and build a premium? Because the other thing about India is that our products have never really commanded a premium. Premium is not what we actually historically charged. Now we're looking for ways in which we want to sort of do, and that's why, some of the products that have been able to break the threshold and become brands and become good quality brands are the ones that are starting to command a premium. And even some of the Indians are saying, "Itna mehenga kyun?" But that's also a huge shift that's happening in terms of what is being delivered at the end of the day. So that's what my whole thing is, that culture is created by people. Brands ride culture or do not ride it. So I think these are some of the things in culture that are there. Now, the second part, which is you were talking about, Can it be measured? Yes, it can be measured. I think one is from a short-term standpoint. The other is from a long-term standpoint. From a short-term standpoint, it's pretty clear that there are certain low-hanging metrics that you would use. So let's say you would use a social sentiment. You would use Reddit threads. You would use social engagement metrics. All those sorts of things are short-term indications of saying that what is the culture around being spoken about. But then you could use a mid-term metric. Let's say you could use cultural resonance, which is a function of a lot of things like affinity, trust, so on and so forth, which people naturally start building towards a brand which is there. So let's say, for example, when Swiggy started the quick delivery business, the food delivery business, the cultural resonance that the brand had wouldn't have been what it is today. Over the course of time, it sort of sparked that affinity. It sparked trust. It sparked acceptance of the brand. Now, whether that was through tangible delivery of products, or that was the way Swiggy decided to come out and behave like a brand, right? Which also tells us that the model is now shifting from a traditional brand broadcast model to a brand behavior model now. And within the realm of how you behave is the way your cultural resonance will be. And of course, the long term is about how do you sort of, see penetration of certain brands that are more culturally resonant to have in society? Do they sort of over-index versus other brands at the same premiumness or price point versus the mass, or how they're positioned? So I think these are certain things in which, I usually talk about culture, and I usually talk about how do you measure culture. But I think that sort of pretty much sums up my point of view on culture.
It's very fascinating. So when you brought the shoes example, our concept of paisa vasool was always that, it was more, the emphasis was always on paisa, whether it is that, it was never on that value part of it, right? So the same set, but that is where the difference, that is the shift that has happened in the last 10, 15 years, as more and more Indians are exposed to global cultures, right? Where from that paisa vasool to spending 15, 20 lakhs to go see a football World Cup match or a Wimbledon match and saying that also is paisa vasool. That kind of changes how you think, right? Then the emphasis is on the value, the experience. And as you rightly said, Indian companies have traditionally played more on the margin game. And you brought the example of tea, right? The entire tea business, I worked extensively in this field, so I can tell you, is that Indian brands still look at it as a margin play. While the bigger brands, the names that you took, there are huge margins there, right? So it's like the premium is almost unlimited in tea. If there are tea that can be sold at 1 lakh rupees per kg if you sell it right. But in Indian, most of the manufacturers let at a margin say 10-15%, and they are done with it. And the European and other brands worldwide, nobody can contest that the best of the tea comes from India. That is, but we still are not able to kind of own that. And when that entire Prada incident happened, when they took that Kolhapuri chappal, right? There was a lot of resent. How can they do this? As a brand marketer, I had a very different take to this. I said, at least Prada was confident and courageous enough to take a 500 rupee chappal and sell it at 50,000. It takes a lot of courage to say that, hey, this is my premium and this is what I want. Needs to have a lot of confidence, belief on the product that you build, and say, hey, this is what I've built and I have a right to command what I am. So I think then that is very, very interesting. And if the day the products rise that cultural wave, possibly that premium, as you said, I like that fact that premium is ancient, and that's very nice, right? So I think hopefully that part of Indian companies riding India will go into the future. But there is also a big aspect of people shaping culture, and I think that's a conversation for some other day. And you spoke about the marketing being a platform play. You have been both on the agency side, you have been on the platform side with JioSaavn. Heard a lot of people say that when you talk with agencies, the agencies sell you a lot of confidence. But what works very beautifully in a pitch or a deck ends up being very generic when it comes to execution. Is that a fair charge, or there is a structural things that the agency model can do differently, or like in an agency model that is how the structure is inherently? So what's your take on that?
So I think this is This is a conversation that spans over a decade, actually. I think the fact that the way traditionally brand building has been sort of looked at and done, the premium that it commanded was on the thinking and the process. Now, currently, as you see, most of the marketing moving to platform-based marketing. Now, what could have been the best case that platforms would have presented to marketers? The best case was platforms cannot deliver process. Platforms cannot deliver thinking. Platforms can give you a rail, or they can give you a sort of an audience, and it can give you a field where your thinking and your process plays out. That's what they can give at the end of the day. So the best thing for them was to start charging on outcomes, which is where I think most of the expectation from the agency world is moving, saying that AI can do thinking, AI can do process. So what is the outcome that you're giving me? Which is where I think the agency world is shifting to a more product-based first approach. So all agencies, all holding companies are building their own proprietary products. They could straddle in from something as, let's say in the creative or the brand building, they could be something as cultural tools. They could be sort of proprietary reports. On the media side, it could be something as basic as principal creating products. They could be AI-driven implementation, execution, and reporting ecosystems. Those are what they're doing. So what's happening is that it's probably the shift to platform-based marketing that has changed the mindset of marketers as well. Now, coming back to your question, which is it fair for agencies to charge in that sort of a way? My whole question, which remains unresolved and highly debatable with anybody I speak to about this, is actually twofold. One is, if you think processes and thinking can be done by anybody, by even AI, right, at the end of the day, let's constantly track the differentiation that your brand is clocking on a periodic basis. What you start finding data globally, which has started to come out, is overall brands are losing differentiation. And I think comes from a certain point of view saying that you go to a platform, uski algorithm hai, it'll target, it will do everything on its own, so on and so forth. But hey, you're not the only player in the category, right? You are having 5 other competitors who are probably spending equal or more amount of money, and they ultimately land up targeting the same cohorts that even you are sort of going after, and that algorithm puts them in front of the same people that even you are being sent to. How are you going to differentiate yourself? And I think that is not the place where marketers are having a debate as of today. Marketers are increasingly going towards the outcomes game without realizing that the raw material that they're putting in is inferior. And that's the entire conundrum at this point of time in the marketing world as well. The platform's overall cost per acquisition, it started going up. First, it started going up across certain brands in certain categories. Then it started going across different categories altogether. Cost per acquisition, everybody's talking about it, right? Now we've got a new toy called AI, which is coming. So everybody's basically running after AI discoverability now. That's the next thing. And that cost per acquisition conversation, while it still remains pertinent, but it has a new neighbor that shares attention with it, which is AI at the end of the day. Now you see how that evolution in the narrative is happening. It's not that I'm against it. And in fact, personally, consult with a lot of clients, a lot of brands of mine on AI as well. On all fronts, which is discoverability, web accelerator, web output, so on and so forth, everything. And I think it's a very interesting game to play in. I think things like these should happen every few years, and kudos to the ecosystem that they built to sort of, spark such things over the course of time. But my whole deal is that your basic fundamentals of brands which are coming back into fashion, why is there Inger Bass Institutes coming they're coming again? Why is mental availability as a concept, attention as a concept coming back again? It's because differentiation is being lost at every level. And the second question I have to ask to the marketing world is, how much of this questioning the creative agency have they been able to resolve by getting in-house teams? And that is a question, and it's not an acquisition, it's just a question. But I have never heard any marketer say, I believe in creativity and brand building more after I have formed an in-house team. No, I've never heard any marketer say that. I have basically just heard everybody saying costs are optimized now when it comes to creative development. I have an in-house team that sort of does everything for me, and they spend their 100% time They don't have timesheets. They spend 100% time on my brands. That's the only sort of convincing argument that comes up. Full respect to going deep into one brand and all. Ideally, that's the way life should be. But given the agency model, no agency can survive by serving to just one client. We've seen agencies like place where I used to work, Lintas, heavily indexed on Unilever businesses, but then have to move, right? Because money at the end of the day. TBWA Media Art Labs is probably the only agency that still caters to an Apple as a client. But after a certain point of time, even Wyden and Kennedy, Portland office had to diversify beyond Nike to earn money, right? So I think there are a lot of conversations like these which I keep having within the community. And it's quite interesting when it comes to creative resources and creative agencies. That's where I stand.
Recently, I was having a conversation and he asked me the question whether taking from Khosla ka Ghosla, whether you are a party or a broker, right? So he was like, are you a builder or a service provider? That's the question, right? So that's an interesting, and I know it was a very interesting conversation that we had around that. You spoke about AI being the new neighbor with grabbing all the attention and stuff like that, right? And every conversation that we have, it is, and I look at AI as in both cases, right? So how can, there is a part around AI discoverability, the other part is around AI being used, and as you said, that differentiation is being lost because while it is being done, something is being done faster and cheaper doesn't really mean it is being differentiated. There's a lot of convergence of ideas. So AI can do a lot of things, right? It can write statements, it can write taglines, it can write campaign ideas, all of that is there, right? The part, as you said, thinking cannot be done. It has to be, that brand strategy, thinking of your brand ground up. It has to be done by you or a creator, person who understands that really well, right? There are certain parts of this that genuinely cannot be automated. And in this rush of adopting to AI, right, are brand strategists being honest about themselves, whether, that part that cannot be automated, are they protecting it, or are we losing that somewhere in this entire AI conversation?
First of all, I think we should probably look at the hierarchy at which strategy sits.
Mm-hmm.
One is within the agency ecosystem, the other is in front of the marketing community. Now, I think all the conversations that I have had within my community of people who've been in advertising, so on and so forth. First of all, I think let's just sort of de-link the fact that the brand is the responsibility only of the agency. It is not. It is a collective responsibility of a lot of other people. But let's say from the world that marketing came from, where it was about broadcast model and advertising used to be the only way in which you could put the brand in front of the audience. Coming from that school, because I'm saying that marketing is also about legacy, and it takes a little bit of while for marketing to sort of move beyond legacy and try newer things as well. But I'm still sort of coming and addressing that larger mindset, is that strategy within an organizational setup has always been seen as a cost, not a revenue generator. And I think one is, over the course of time, strategists, so no matter how much ever blood they come within to sort of prove the metal that strategy can deliver, it is the system around them which basically defines what they bring to the table. So one is about saying that, can strategy evolve beyond the mindset of being a cost and tying itself to that? And I'm not talking about strategist thinking. I'm talking about everybody. Strategists are very optimists, big optimists, and they're very optimistic about the fact that yes, we can change the world, which is something that I think is something to applaud at this point of time. But it's the encouragement that they get within the system to do that. So let's say, for example, the average campaign development cycle has been massively crunched. Earlier, innovation projects used to last for a year. Now, innovation, as it happens, so on and so forth, you are asked from the day you're briefed to actually the campaign going on the road is a 1.5 month period, including shoot and pre-prod, everything. So 1.5, 2 months is like the average time that campaigns hit the road. So one is about saying that whatever is the best available solution, let's go ahead with it. It's not about the solution that's needed over the course of time. So I think that is one thing that sort of affected brand building and strategy per se. The other is the perception of strategy outside the agency and the brand building world in marketers. Let's see. Another sort of thing is that there is increasing emphasis on ROI that's happening today. where CFOs are demanding what is marketing delivering to the table. In fact, so much so that conversations and debates have basically said that the average life cycle of a CMO is just 3 years. And in that reality, a CMO rightfully will choose about delivering ROIs as opposed to saying that what a great brand or campaign that I delivered at the end of the day. So it is a function of the system in which brand builders and strategists also live today, which impacts the work that they can ultimately deliver. And I think that is the sort of state of strategy today. Work every year produces a very interesting report about strategy. I think that's a good read. If you read it over the last 3-4 years, I think there's a lot of change you see in one, how does the outside world look at strategy and how do strategists look at strategy? So you sort of see a lot of strategists openly embracing AI, to come to your question actually more pointedly, and what they can do with it. Because now they've realized is that there are a lot of things they used to do in terms of ethnographic studies, going to databases, churning out numbers, getting insights, triangulating them, then getting the right solution, so on and so forth. But now with AI, you can sort of have those triangulations done. Like, for example, when for my own content business, when I was drawing out a content slate and I needed to triangulate multiple reports, I used a lot of help from AI to sort of help me do the analysis. So I think when I had to scan Parrot Analytics, Netflix trends, share of search analysis reports, the sort of global content direction reports by Deloitte, so on and so forth. All these findings had to be sort of structured in a certain way to come down to what are people watching, what are the shifts that are happening, to actually what are the sort of tropes in, let's say, the micro-dramas world, and where they are and where they're heading. Based on these few things is where we sort of developed our own content slate. And the 35 IPs, so on and so forth, that we've developed is on the basis of things like these. So I'm saying that these are various things that strategists are now coming to use, which is proving that AI is actually a force of multiplier for a lot of people. My only thing is, do not reject it. It is a very, very powerful tool for not just strategists, but for the entire marketing community. And if there is a tool that basically translates your thinking and your direction into execution, optimization, and reporting, at the end of the day, why not take it? Please do. And to all the marketers who are spending, or let's say have intent of spending and onboarding AI systems I think they're spending millions of dollars on that. My only thing to everybody would be, let's clearly state or define the objective or the tasks for which you want to implement AI. And I think that's where a marketer's clarity comes hugely in the picture. When marketing has clarity, it conveys what it wants very clearly to the agencies, and the agencies, as a result, give or deliver against the right output. I think this sort of a machinery needs to sort of start building itself again, and I think that's where the holy grail of marketing and brand building lies.
Yeah. So now we are towards the end of this podcast, and I have two very interesting questions to ask you. One is that 20 years, multiple companies, both sides of the table, you're doing something very different now. What is it that you believe now about branding, which you couldn't have told if I'd asked you the question when you were starting? Something that you learned and something that you believe in now.
What specifically about brand building, if you were to?
Say, for example, certain things that, I'll tell you, I've been an entrepreneur, right? So my idea of entrepreneurship was very different when I started living it. From what you believe, being in a startup world, chasing fundraising, chasing valuations, all of that is very different, right? At the end of the day, entrepreneurship is about doing hard things that you're possibly not even good at again and again till the time you succeed. And it's a very unglamorous part of the work that, media or when you look at from outside, entrepreneurship is like, okay, you do a startup and it's the success stories that get blown up so much. But entrepreneurship is about a lot of hard work, a lot of figuring out things, a lot of, hours put into it. So that is something that possibly people had not told me before. They're like, you're in the middle of a jungle and there is not even a pavement around you. You have to cut down the trees to figure your way out, right? So that is my learning out of it. The other part that I learned about entrepreneurship possibly was that, idea had doesn't mean anything if it is not followed by execution. Idea is something that that's plenty out there. If your execution is better, that's the only mode that you can build. So I'm saying things like this, that when I was outside, when I was starting off, I believed something very different. 10 years into this career, I see things differently. I believe things differently. Is there a parallel to brand building that you can think of, is the question?
Yes, plenty. How do I condense it? I think that's the challenge. One is, I think with brand building evolving every couple of years, it's best to be a student and not a professor. I think one is, being a student gives you the room to not dispute or refuse anything. You are always sort of open to sort of learning something new. The second mindset that it sort of brings in is the fact that there's a long road ahead. And when you went the process of brand building with that mindset, which is the long road ahead, you're always in beta phase. And I think that's something very, very important from brand building, the entire beta phase, which is constantly sort of testing what works, what doesn't work. Yes, you could have a structured approach to everything, which is these are definitely the things I want to sort of check, evaluate, but do not mistake structure for linearity. I think that is the sort of big difference when you are sort of walking in with a student mindset. The fact that AI presents an opportunity, I picked up AI. Let's say if the sort of brand building narrative has changed, saying that earlier brand building was only a responsibility of marketing, but now brand building is a responsibility of the entire organization. How do I sort of look at brand from an organization standpoint, right? So it's almost like saying that the guy who's coming to deliver you food to your house is also a messenger of the brand. So and it's not marketing campaign at the end of the day. So how to sort of keep testing and keeping an open mind, I think that's the first thing about brand building that has sort of changed, which is about saying that have a student approach. The other is think about it of brand as not a part of marketing, but brand as an organization. That's the second part about it. The third thing that comes to me about brands is that, and here's something that is just something I think when I lie down on the couch. It's almost like lying on a therapy chair, right? Where you have no evidence, you have no pressure to create any output or anything as such. But when I think about brand building, or let's say even when I'm thinking about a solution to anything, what I see is that there's so much of marketing, so much of campaigns that have already happened. Every possible thought, every possible proposition has probably been tested on this earth across some category by some brand or the other. And on top of that, the pressure for differentiation adds even more complexity to this entire thing, right? I think interestingly, what we as brand builders need to inculcate within ourselves is being more culturists, because the only way you'll make brand building relevant to the process of marketing is by saying that I want to bring something to the table that's not being done, that's not out there. And that can only come from when you are sort of able to read where the headwinds are, where the tailwinds are. And the culture gives you those headwinds and those tailwinds, which are there. So I think that's the third part I would emphasize a lot more about brand building, and something that I sort of keep myself on, which is after, let's say, brand as an organization, I would probably say be a culturist. Even more today is a tip, and is a certain belief that even I am sort of growing within myself every day.
Oh, that's quite interesting. So being a student is something that is definitely there and very important, because right from the time when we started our careers, if you had to reach to 100,000 people, the only way was through advertisement or print media and all of that. Now you can do that you can reach through a mobile phone. And that change itself has kept all of us very, there have been different phases of learning throughout. And I'm very sure that learning is still ahead for all of us here. Okay. Now, the last question that I have, that, if a founder or a CMO or a brand builder is listening to this podcast and they go back to work on Monday, is there's one thing that you can say that can help them look at their brands differently because of this conversation? What is one thing that you would want them to do? Not to think about, but do. Because brand building is a constant effort. And I'm sure that, there is a tip that we all can learn from you.
Don't make brand building a formulaic thing or a linear process. I think for far too long, we sort of tried to make it fit a certain slot, and a slot that we built ourselves. Brand building is not that rigid. It's not. Today, you would have put paid and owned assets out there, which are very well within your control. And that is part of Formulaic. But a lot of brand conversations shape not because of what you put out over there, but what the public makes of it. So what will you do then? What is your contingency plan? What is your long-term trust building narrative? What is your mid-term and short-term relevance building stance? These are things that cannot be bound into a formula. They can't be bound to how a platform works. They are almost like, and here's where I sort of bring in a little bit of musician out of me, is you see a console at a live event. There's a stage over there, and somewhere in the audience back over there, there's a console that's being operated by the brand's sound manager. While during the sort of sound check, which happens hours before the actual performance, you pretty much know the levels that you've got to mix the sound at for an optimal experience out over there. There are 1,000 other variables that happen when the audience actually comes in. It's the sound of the audience. It's the air that's blowing. It's when audience starts singing with you. It is the reverb as a result that the speakers create, so on and so forth. 1,000 other things which a sound manager or a sound engineer decides on the spot. And that's why sound engineers actually command a very, very high premium to be at those concerts, managing those consoles of those artists. Somewhere, a brand building person needs to have been exposed to so many tools, so many variety of things and interventions that there should always be almost like a back of the head playbook that can be sort of implemented when the need arises. And I think that's my whole submission of saying that you can do how many ever sound checks with related to brand building, but when the live event is going on, there's a good percentage of your plan that you need to think of on the ball. And that's what you said, right? That's the difference between someone who builds a campaign for ideation and there are some people who build a campaign for its ultimate execution outcome. That's the difference between building for an idea or building for a change that you want to bring.
The things that I'll take is around, because brand building could be as you said, it is not a person's or an agency's responsibility. It is the responsibility of everybody involved, because every touch point that you have with your customer, the paper that it is wrapped in, the person who comes to deliver, or so all of that pays, and it is not just one experience, but that consistent, constant experience that you create over a period of time that helps the brand be what it is. All I can say is that it's been an incredible podcast listening to you, your experiences and how you think about it. Before we close this session, things that you're doing now, right? What keeps you excited about the future? Now, 20 years in different aspects of brand building and marketeer. Next 20 years, what are your plans?
What keeps me excited is the rate at which the Gen Zs and Gen Alphas are changing things around, and the equally slow pace at which marketers are understanding them.
Yeah,
I think that is a brilliant tension for.
So you attribute that to generation gap, like as we are getting older. What's around that?
That will require a separate podcast. Yeah, but I think that's what keeps me excited quite a bit. No, but honestly, it's not just these two demographics that are changing everything. Yeah. I think it's the over 45s, the over 50s, because what's happening is that lifestyle changes, right? Which is lifestyle's not letting you be healthy anymore, and the medicines won't let you die. Mm-hmm. So the post 50, post 60s generation is another demographic that is very, very interesting and standing out there. The kind of brands that are being built for that generation and the potential that they have is crazy. Like, husbands are popping off. All they're leaving their entire wealth to their wives. So suddenly, rich women post 50, post 60 is a very special. I'm not saying that there are no rich women under 50. In fact, the narrative is changing drastically over there, and for the best, probably. Yeah, the entire conversation that I have with my female friends around patriarchy and so on and so forth, those kind of topics, is a lot more pertinent even today, and more pertinent probably even in the coming days. So there is a lot of flux out there, and I think these are some of the things that keep me excited about things. And whenever I see on LinkedIn any marketer post looking for creative agencies, looking for social agencies who can do this, that, I think I would evolve that a little, and such posts need to start sounding like not needing an agency who can do this, but need someone who can help me make this change in my brand. That becomes an open interpretation, and let's see the fun we have.
Yeah. No, it brought me one of the memories, one of very solid, one of the everlasting memories that I've had. I was at Santorini with my wife, and yes, and we were on a boat trip, and along with us on that boat, I think 10, 12, 60 plus Brazilian women who had come without their spouses. And I don't know the reasons behind that, but we had fun interacting with them, and they were so full of life. And not just that memory. And as you said, the flux currently is so good. India, say for example, is a very interesting market. Talked about this, people's taste, preferences, spending patterns that is changing. The generation that is now in the driving seat for many buying decisions, they think very differently. People in our age group, I have never seen people in 40s worry so much about fitness, lifestyle, because suddenly people can afford good things. They want better things. They want to be fit enough to enjoy those things. So these are creating categories. People having money, women having money and willing to spend it. All of that, there are 50 plus people, 60 plus people who are fit enough, but they said, hey, there is a lot to life than to just retire. I think there are great challenges and great opportunities for brands and brand builders like us. So I'm super excited, as you are. And and as I said, this entire conversation is around why not India? And I think the lessons from this to a lot of listeners, brand builders out there is that we are at a place and time in history where next 15, 20 years will create great brands out of India. And I think it is where China was possibly in 2000s, where, if you pre-2000 to the next 20 years of China is very, very different. I think that is where we are today. So next 20 years of Indian brand building, the challenge and the opportunity will be very, very different.
Absolutely. And let's leave it.
Yes. So that's the intent. So more conversations around this is something that not only we will bring as part of this podcast series, but more conversations around how do we do this, right? From, as you said, it is about experiences, cultures, people contribution to cultures. So brand building is not just an exercise, and people who understand that, as you said, founders and CMOs who understand that it's a continuous, not even a process. I think it's a school of thought, and you need to think about it in a very different way. So thank you, Gursimran. Thank you so much for having this conversation with us. Yeah. And
pleasure. I love doing this. Thank you for having me over, Sudhanshu. I particularly enjoyed quite a bit, and it was great to pick this up, especially because I've known you since years, since Antwerp, and it's been quite a journey. And I'm really loving, the other ventures that you were sort of picking up alongside right now. I'm sure the sort of listeners of this podcast will have the opportunity to know about those ventures in other conversations as well. And let's pick up other things about culture, so on and so forth, maybe in another episode later sometime. Yep, this is going to be a great one, I hope. Fingers crossed, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Gursimran. And this is me sign off. Thank you so much.